Okay, and today we're going to be, let's do the view, sorry, let's make sure that we have the view to full screen. We're going to continue on in informal fallacies. And I previously covered 3.1, what fallacies are in general, 3.2, fallacies of relevance, and now we'll do fallacies of what's called weak induction. So the fallacies of relevance have to do with deductive arguments where you just go off to things that are irrelevant. Fallacies of weak induction obviously have to do with inductive arguments that if you were in, if this is the logic course, if it's another course, you didn't cover this perhaps, but in general, we would have covered in chapter 1. Okay, so this is, again, where a weak induction means that that's the first step to test the strength or weakness of an inductive argument, and then go to see if the premises are actually true and see if they're cogent or non-cogent. Hopefully my voice doesn't give out. I'm doing like 2 of these in a row, but I hope you're doing well in the class thus far and understanding the concepts through these lectures. If not, I can certainly switch to other formats. I have thought about using more of a podcast type version to go through chapter 3, but then I realized by the time we get to the other kinds of work we need to do, you really do need to see it on the screen. All right, so these are the fallacies of weak induction. So again, they're non-cogent arguments, but even worse than that, they're weak induction. Okay. So the first one is going to be the appeal to...
Section 3.3 introduces...
I hate when I don't hit the volume. This section introduces the fallacy of weak induction. Fallacies of weak induction occur when the premises provide a tiny bit of support for a conclusion, but not enough to believe the conclusion. Okay? In other words, even if the premises are true, the conclusion is not likely. So this is the 9th fallacy you will have learned. It's the appeal to the unqualified authority. An arguer cites a statement made by someone else as evidence for a conclusion, and that person is not qualified to make such a statement. So I'm afraid, so you see this sign, and you say, I'm afraid that means you'll have to change your dental appointment. Obviously it's a joke, not a very good one, but this normally would lead you to believe, the world is going to end in 5 days, right? Supposedly. But this person in general, the person on the street corner saying these things, nobody's seen any of these people in about 50 years, but they were around at some point historically. And obviously this person is not an authority. Now, if this was a scientist or a group of scientists who were saying that in fact there's an asteroid heading towards Earth and so on, then we might want to take this more seriously. But that is a qualified authority. But this is not, this is an unqualified authority. Okay. So in this dialogue here, we have Professor Taylor, my accounting instructor, says that Longfellow is the greatest poet who ever lived. He does. And Professor Taylor is incredibly handsome. More handsome than I. Should be than me. Nobody speaks like that. Longfellow must therefore be the greatest. So the argument is, my accounting professor says this, therefore it must be the case. But of course, an accounting professor is not an expert in English poetry, and therefore can't be expected to have the final say on who is the greatest poet. So again, Tracy's argument is, my accounting instructor says that Longfellow is the greatest poet, therefore Longfellow is indeed the greatest poet, because her accounting professor said this. It's fallacious because an accounting instructor is probably not an expert in poetry. It can be, but from the information we're given, we don't sense any of that. Okay? If this was an argument about accounting, then he would be a proper authority, but he's an unqualified authority at this point. The stature of a poet involves a large measure of taste, so even qualified experts would be expected to disagree on this question. So that's true too, but you at least have to start to give an argument. So for this fallacy, authorities can include both experts and witnesses. And we'll see what we mean here. An authority can lack credibility as a result of inexpertise, perhaps they're biased, or have a prejudice, or a motive to lie, or an inability to perceive or recall. Okay. In the appeal to ignorance, the premises assert that nothing has been proved about something. The conclusion then asserts something positive about that thing. Okay? Madame Lafarge will reveal your future. This is an important argument, type of argumentative fallacy, because it is used all the time. Nobody has proved that she can't do it, doesn't mean that she can do it. Lack of knowledge does not lead to a conclusion of positive knowledge. That's another way to say that. Just because nobody has proved that she can't do it doesn't mean she has. So it's called an appeal to ignorance. Tracy, do you think that a flying saucer really did crash in Roswell, New Mexico several years ago? I have no idea. Well, look at it this way. Nobody's ever proved that a flying saucer didn't crash at Roswell, right? As far as I know. So that means that a flying saucer did crash there. Again, he's starting from nobody has proved this to saying something positive, right? But you can't go from ignorance to a conclusion positive there, meaning that something did exist. You can't go from non-existence of something to the existence of something. Nobody's seen this, therefore it must exist. That's not the case. So Mike argues that nobody has proved that a flying saucer did not crash at Roswell, so it follows that a flying saucer did crash there. Right? In general, lack of proof is not evidence for anything. Okay? So that's the big issue here, okay, in this fallacy. Okay? Lack of proof is not evidence in anything. Now, this is a general rule. There are times where scientists will say, we have sought out evidence for this, and we keep finding that it's not the case. We keep finding it's not the case. We keep finding it's not the case. At that point, you can make conclusions. But lack of proof is not evidence for anything. In general, works outside the sciences. Okay? And even within the sciences, right? Nobody's ever proven that God doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that God does exist. Okay? No one has ever proven that I wasn't at the store breaking into it last night. Doesn't mean that I didn't break into a store last night. Okay? However, there are two exceptions to this rule, which are important. First, if qualified investigators search for something and find nothing, this may indeed imply that there's nothing to be found. Right? We've been looking for the lost city of Atlantis for many centuries since it was first mentioned in the works of Plato in the Timaeus. We've continued to look for it. This is no joke. Some people believe that it still believes that the lost city of Atlantis exists. But qualified investigators have looked for it and not found it, and therefore we can conclude that there's nothing to be found. Secondly, if the prosecutor in an American or Canadian criminal trial fails to prove guilt, the defendant is considered not guilty. Right? So that's the second way in which proving nothing actually does lead to a conclusion, which is that the person is not guilty. Okay? But again, ignorance does not generally lead to positive knowledge. And again, when I say positive knowledge, I mean you go from ignorance to suddenly having knowledge of something. Okay? No one has ever proven that there's no flying saucers. Does not mean that there are flying saucers. See how ignorance leads to somehow knowledge. That's not the case. Hasty generalization, I think, is going to be fairly straightforward. This has to do with all types of prejudices. The younger generation is a disaster. As you get old, I hate these cartoons, but as you get older, there's always something that happens. You always think the generation before or after you is taking us to hell or not mature enough. So I try to watch for that in my own life as I get older. Everybody always thinks the kids these days are up to no good. Don't do that as you get older. But anyway, a general conclusion is drawn from an atypical sample here. So in other words, looking at these three guys, who look pretty fine to me, leads this person to say the young generation is a disaster. I guess he's not into punk rock or something, I don't know. But in any case, all forms of prejudice and bigotry are forms of hasty generalization. if they've even gone that far. I think I look ugly. Don't be silly. Of course you don't. Look at Barbara over there. Her hairdo is twice as nice as mine. It is nice. And here comes Cynthia. What a great figure she has. And look at Jamie. She has a gorgeous face. These people really have quite a relationship. Every woman on this campus is prettier than me. Okay. Why do you think you look fabulous? You do? What a sweet thing to say. In other words, she was making a hasty generalization because out of 4 people that happened to be around, I guess they had a certain presentation or look that led them to believe, led her to believe wrongly that she was the least beautiful person on campus or something like that. Again, I'm not a big fan of some of these cartoons, but in general, this software and doing the recording for it is, I think, more useful than going through what's provided in the book. Because the book are already reading and going through. So Tracy's argument is that Barbara, Cynthia, and Jamie are prettier than I, therefore every woman on the campus is prettier than me, right? Again, hasty generalization. This sample is probably atypical. It is too small, and it's not randomly selected, right? Those 4 people, maybe it was whatever stereotype you might have, but it might have been a group of 4 people who, I don't know, who would come out of a modeling session or something. I'm trying to clean up what I think is at times a really weird focus in these cartoons on women's looks. So Tracy's argument is fallacious because Barbara and Cynthia are probably not representative of the entire group of women students. The sample is too small, and it's not randomly selected. So if in this class we cover statistics, we'll go through how you do randomly select so that you can make generalizations that are more, that are not fallacious. So every hasty generalization proceeds from a statement about a sample to a claim about the whole population or a larger group, right? You've seen these 4 people. They are a sample of these college women. And then she says, every woman on this campus is prettier than me. So let's do some practice problems involving these first 3 fallacies. No one has ever proved, and as soon as you see that, no one has ever proved, you should know what fallacy that is, that school vouchers would improve public education. We can only conclude that they would not improve it. Okay? Now, there are studies on school vouchers and stuff, but let's pretend there isn't, and nobody has ever proved that school vouchers would improve public education. When we're moving from no one has ever proved to we can only conclude that they would not improve it, we have an appeal to ignorance. Okay? So always look for that. Nobody, no one has proven, etc. will always lead you to the appeal to ignorance. Members of the jury, Mr. Evans testified that he heard the defendants conspire to rob the convenience store. Therefore, you must find the defendants guilty, even though Mr. Evans is nearly deaf and the defendants were in another room with the door closed. Okay? So members of the jury, Mr. Evans testified that he heard the defendants conspire to rob the convenience store. You must find the defendants guilty. No prosecutor, though, would ever add this or emphasize this. If Mr. Evans is nearly deaf and the defendants were in another room with the door closed, obviously he couldn't have heard them conspire or would be unlikely to have heard them conspire. Okay? In other words, Mr. Evans is an unqualified authority. Okay? Again, unqualified authority could be somebody making a claim who supposedly has authority but doesn't, and also witness testimony can be an unqualified authority. That's exactly what defense attorneys are always looking to do, is to show that actually this eyewitness who's said to be an authority in this case, they're always trying to show that actually they're unqualified for whatever reasons. Right? Do they wear glasses? How high is the prescription? Did they have glasses on that day? Could they really have seen this happen, etc.? Yesterday, 2 students were diagnosed as having mononucleosis. Today, 2 more were given the same diagnosis. It's obvious we have an epidemic. Everyone on campus has mono. So see what happens here, right? We move from a sample of 4 to everybody. That is obviously a hasty generalization. Okay? It's not obviously the case that everyone has a campus. This is obviously cause for concern, and the conclusion you should draw is we have cause for concern that some people are getting mono and that it might be spreading in the school. That's the only conclusion you could draw, but not that everyone on campus has mono. This one is false cause. This will be hopefully relatively straightforward. False cause is committed when the conclusion of an argument depends on a supposed causal connection that probably does not exist. Right? Quick, toss a pinch of salt over your left shoulder. Okay. In other words, this all forms of what do you call it? All forms of superstition are false causes. Okay. There are four varieties of false cause: post hoc, ergo propter hoc, non causa pro causa, after this, therefore before this, oversimplified cause, and the gambler fallacy. Okay, we'll get to these. The gambler's fallacy is actually quite an important one, not just for gamblers, because it's a commonly held belief. So post hoc ergo propter hoc means after this, therefore on account of this. Two things are causally connected merely because one happens after the other. Okay? Non causa pro causa, not the cause for the cause. We'll get to this. Just means that. Two things are causally connected merely because they happen over the same interval of time. So the first fallacy, right, form of this fallacy has to do with things happening in succession, and this one has to do with happening at the same time. Okay, so it'll be easy to tell in that way. So it also covers mistaking the cause for the effect, selecting as the cause the wrong factor from a number of factors. So oversimplified cause is a multitude of causes combined to produce an effect, and one of them is treated as if it were the only. For example, let's say you have a psychological disorder such as depression, and you begin to take medication, and you begin to get better. Depression, and they happen to be communal. It could be that you're also exercising more, which is shown in studies to help with depression. And my depression went away or it got better. Then you would be oversimplifying the cause and its relationship to the effect. That is, the medication, among other causes, that leads to a less. The gambler's fallacy. It's my favorite one. This fallacy is committed when an arguer supposes that events in a game of chance are causally related when in fact they are not. An example appears on this screen. I've won at bingo for the past 20 rounds, therefore he will certainly win in the next round. Right? And if you've ever been to a casino, you know that people say, I'm due for a win. Right? Well, that's not the case. Flipping coins, right? And you say, well, it's come up heads. As you know, the chances of heads or tails is 1 out of 2 times in a row. We're due to have tails on the next one. No, you're not. The chances are exactly the same the next time, 1 out of 2. The chances don't change. Since one round of bingo has no influence on the next, it is no more likely that Mike will win in the next round than it was in the first. In other words, the chances are the same each time. Okay? But this is a tip. So let's look at this comic strip in order to look at the 3 varieties of false cause. Do you think Professor Smith will give us a pop quiz today? Stop asking that. Every time you've asked, he's given us a for it or not, does not mean it's there's a relationship there. Okay? That's causa pro causa. That is when the same interval of time. Okay? Or one. It's coincidence. That's what we're talking about. Okay? Coincidence does not mean causation. Okay, but I wish he would stop telling us what terrible students we are. So do I. If he wants us to improve, he should give us better grades. I can agree with that, but I know how I can improve, right? So no, she's mistaking the effect for the cause. If he wants us to improve, he should give us better grades. But obviously, that mistakes the effect for the cause, right? I mean, not the cause. In other words, if he wants us to improve, he should give us better grades means you don't improve by having better grades, right? That's the effect. You need a proper cause, right? Getting better grades does not make one improve. Well, how is he going to improve? I'm going to buy a textbook. Everybody I know who buys a textbook gets better grades. So Mike's argument, you're asking about a quiz, causes Professor Smith to give us a quiz. Therefore, if you ask about a quiz today, Professor Smith will give us a quiz today. The basis for the causal connection. In the past, quizzes have always followed Tracy's asking about them. And Tracy's argument is better grades cause improved performance. Therefore, if Professor Smith wants us to improve, he should give us better grades. Tracy's argument confuses cause with effect. This argument illustrates non causa pro causa. That is, it's not the cause for the cause. Confusing the cause, what's not the cause for the cause. Another way of saying that is she's confusing cause and effect, and that's a non causa pro causa version of this fallacy. Mike's argument about buying a textbook causes better grades, therefore if I buy textbooks, then my grades will improve. Actually, buying a textbook is only one factor among many leading to better grades. If you buy it, you need to read it, you need to study it. You also need to be paying attention in class, and so on. In other words, it's a simplified cause, right? An oversimplified one. So one final reminder before selecting false cause, make sure that the conclusion depends on a supposed causal connection. Okay? Every time every time I take my dog out for a walk, it starts to rain. Therefore, whenever my taking my dog out for a walk causes rain showers. Obviously, that's a false cause, right? It's just a coincidence the last few times you've been going outside with your dog, right? So look for a causal connection. Okay. Again, these are fallacies of weak induction. Okay. And this one is going to be the slippery slope. Don't touch that cookie. Next, you'll want the cake, the pie, the fudge. You'll gain a ton. God, there's a lot of fat shaming in this one. And a lot of attention to women's looks. Okay, but we'll continue on with the cartoon anyway. Notice what a slippery slope does is, and it's a typical type of argument, it's if you go down this road, you literally slide to just eating everything. Okay? And by the way, she should break up with this guy immediately. The slippery slope fallacy is committed when the conclusion rests on an alleged unlikely chain reaction of causes. Now, there are arguments where you can show a chain, where if you can show a chain that shows the relationship between the beginning and the end. But in a slippery slope argument, no causal connections are made. Okay? So one innocent step leads you down to fall down. Your friend Bob told me he wants to borrow your skateboard. Why not? But I wouldn't give it to him if I were you. Why not? Sorry. Well, if you give him the skateboard, the next he'll want your bike. Do you think so? This could get out of hand. And then he'll want your car. Oh. At first, it'll be only for a few minutes, and then it'll be for hours and days, but I need my car. And then he'll want to move into the spare room. Some people are like that. Before you know it, he'll take over the place. Wow. Okay? Get the slippery slope? In other words, we're talking about loaning one little thing, and then suddenly he's moved into the house. Okay? And your whole family would be out on the street. Oh no. Right? I guess I better not give him the skateboard, or loan him the skateboard was the issue. Okay? So obviously this is going to go through all the parts of the slippery slope. Right? Move into your house, and so on. Your family will be out on the street. It's unlikely she commits the slippery slope fallacy. Now there could be steps that are likely, right? But these are unlikely to result. Or at the very least, he could say no when the steps start to get there, right? Number 14 is weak analogy. There are strong analogies, and then there are weak ones. The conclusion depends on in a weak analogy. The conclusion depends on analogy or similarity between two things or situations, and the analogy is not strong enough to support the conclusions. Right? They look like jelly beans. They must be jelly beans. Obviously, that's a weak analogy. Obviously, X-Lax is the name of a medication that people take. You do not want to take it by accident. And again, he's going by an analogy between the color of jelly beans and the color of these things, right? That's the analogy, but it's a weak one. Many medications have many colors as well. My friend Tammy tells me that people complain about her wearing a fur coat. A lot of people complain about fur coats these days. I don't get it. Why? Tammy is just like my cat, Missy. Oh? Missy wears a fur coat too, and nobody complains about that. Right? And so you get the weak analogy, right? She's wearing a fur coat is somehow supposed to be similar to her cat wearing a fur coat. Obviously, nobody's concerned that cats are walking around in a fur coat because none of them are killed in order to wear it. And therefore, she's arguing nobody should complain about her wearing a fur coat. In fact, the last time I saw a fur coat, this was something that was an issue up to maybe the 1990s, I think. I haven't heard about fur coats in a very long time. Yeah, indeed, these are obviously, it's a weak analogy. The fact that the cat has a fur coat, which comes from nature, has nothing to do with killing other animals. Numerous other animals often for merely one coat. This is quite a weak analogy. Several animals had to be killed to make Tammy's fur coat, but no animals had to be killed to make the cat's fur coat. So she's not taking up the ethics here of it at all, but trying to bypass it by making a false analogy. So let's do some fact problems. During the 3 years that Jesse had been mayor of our town, the world price of coffee has skyrocketed. Therefore, if we want to bring coffee prices down to normal, we should vote Jesse out of office in the next election, right? Now notice this is a false cause, right? It's arguing that Jesse, by coincidence, right? So that's what you're looking for, is by coincidence, somehow has caused the world price of coffee to skyrocket, even though he's merely a mayor. Again, we're looking in informal fallacies, we are actually looking at the content, right? And these are fallacies of induction. Right? So they're not saying it's absolutely deductively the case, but it's an inductive argument, but it's one with a false cause. Okay? This happens to be the non-causative pro-causative, or false cause. The migrant workers have asked that we give them parasols to shelter them from the hot sun, right? Parasols, by the way, are umbrellas. We don't dare do this because next they'll be asking for rest areas, then lunchroom facilities, then transportation services, medical benefits, and free housing, which perhaps they should get, at least some of this stuff. In the end, the cost will be astronomical. Well, we know what this is. One innocent step leads to astronomical costs, right? But you should give them rest areas and perhaps some lunchroom facilities, since they're usually out on the farm, but that's okay. This is obviously a slippery slope. Right? The conclusion depends on a chain reaction of causes not likely to occur. And again, the boss or the farmer or whoever hired the migrant workers can at any time put a stop to that slope. That's part of it. Abigail has short blonde hair and blue eyes, and she's a devout Protestant. Betty also has short blonde hair and blue eyes, therefore she too is probably a devout Protestant. Okay. What's going on here? There's an analogy being made between having blonde hair and blue eyes to being Protestant. She has this, therefore she probably too is a devout Protestant. It is a weak analogy. Right? Why is it weak? There are plenty of people with short blonde hair and blue eyes who happen to be Catholics or happen to be from other Christian denominations or even Jewish and so on. It is a weak analogy. Right? The analogy consists of similar hair and eye color, but it's not strong enough to support the conclusion. So now let's look at all 6 of these fallacies. Jim, Susie, and Paula said in the school newspaper that they intend to vote for Jack Adams for student body president. I think that settles it. Everyone intends to vote for Adams. Right? So, is it no fallacy? Now, they said that they intend to vote for Jack Adams, but are they a good sample size? I'm not sure how big the school is, right? But we're moving from just 3 people to everyone. That is a generalization, a hasty one at that. Okay? Does that make sense? We're moving from 3 people to everybody. Now, if the school only had 3 people, then we could get to everyone. But because of the everyone, no, it's not likely that everyone is going to vote for Jack Adams, at least based upon this evidence. Okay? So it is a hasty generalization. Alfred Bergowitz, the famous geologist, says that the moon is made of basically the same material as the Earth. From this, we must conclude that the moon is indeed made of basically the same material as the Earth. Now, as a geologist, right, put no fallacy? Yes, indeed, the authority is qualified to make the statements he makes. He's not an unqualified authority. It's going to be either one of these 2. Okay? But he's a qualified. A few minutes ago, that is people who study rocks. That is the matter of the Earth, but also geologists also study moon rocks. Superstition, it's called false cause, right? The conclusion depends on the claim that walking under a ladder causes bad luck. So whenever you see something like superstition, when it comes to mathematics. Barry Miller was also born in Chicago, and in the same year as Casey. Therefore, probably Miller is excellent in math. In Chicago, and born in the same year, and this will make you a genius in mathematics. Now, clearly, that is what? Chicago in the same year has nothing to do with whether or not they are excellent in mathematics, right? It's just not strong enough. Together and so on, then you would have a better, more of an argument that they're both geniuses, right? In other words, it would be a stronger analogy. This can of Spritz today had a subtle taste of lime, therefore probably this one also has a subtle taste of lime. Well, here there's clearly an analogy going on, right? You're making an analogy between the one you're drinking today, with the one that you drank yesterday. Now, to me, this looks pretty strong, right? Colas generally taste the same because they're mass manufactured, right? And so if this can, unless there's other reasons to believe not, like Spritzy Cola Purple or something, if it's the same can as yesterday, then it should have, I think, the same subtle taste of lime. Although I don't know if sodas are ever known for subtle tastes of anything. Okay. In the case of soft drinks, the similarity in label and brand is sufficient to support a conclusion about the taste. Okay. Owners of Stanley steamers want an exemption from paying personal property taxes on their cars. We'll have to turn them down. If we allow this exemption, the next will be the Chevy owners, then the owners of Ford, Lincoln, Cadillacs, and Volvos and Toyotas. In the end, no one will be paying these taxes. Right? Notice from one set of one innocent step, although it's not clear why we should give them an exemption, we then have nobody nobody paying these taxes, right? So innocent step, boom, slippery slope, right? The conclusion depends on a chain reaction. Again, that's what you're looking for, a chain reaction. Our pastor says that prayer in public schools is not unconstitutional. Therefore, we must conclude that such prayer is perfectly legal. Now, it's clear why the pastor would want to make that argument, right? But is the pastor a qualified authority on constitutional law? No. The pastor could be expected to be an expert on the Bible. A pastor could be expected to be an expert on theology and so on. But we do not expect that the pastor, at least unless given other evidence, is a proper authority on the Constitution. You'll excuse me. Okay, so it's an appeal to an unqualified authority. Tinkering with the battery in the past. David must have done something wrong with the battery connection. Now, this would look like either false cause or no fallacy. Now, this is, in fact, he was tinkering with the battery terminals, and if it's the case that his or her car has always started, I would likely believe that David must have done something wrong with the battery connection and say no fallacy. Right? There's a strong causal inference here. The car has always started. David was tinkering with them. Right? This would be the first thing you would think. Nobody's ever proved that poltergeists do not exist. Therefore, we must conclude that they do exist. Remember, when we start off from nobody has ever proved that, and then we get a conclusion that they do exist, we're moving from ignorance to knowledge. Right? And therefore, we have the appeal to ignorance. Okay. Angela Clark, president of the Grape Growers Association, said that the grape pickers do not deserve a raise in pay. We can only conclude that the grape pickers are adequately paid, just as she said. President of the Grape Growers Association, right? We would assume this is the lobbying group for grape growers. That is, she represents the employers. So the problem here would be, is she an authority about whether the grape pickers are adequately paid? No. She's an unqualified authority. Why? She has every reason to make that argument, right? And without giving evidence for that claim, other than that she's the president of the Grape Growers Association, without that, we can conclude only that the grape growers themselves do not want to provide a pay raise. So she's an unqualified authority. As president of the Grape Growers, she's probably biased against the pickers, right? So an unqualified authority has a prejudice or a bias, right? What fallacy is committed in this argument? Alcoholism is a terrible problem in our society. If we could just get rid of those beer ads on TV, then alcoholism would disappear in no time. Okay. Now, this is an appeal to ignorance because it's not saying that it's giving us something. This is a positive fact. Alcoholism is indeed a terrible problem in our society. But it's what? If we could just get rid of those beer ads. Now, this may be one of the things you do, right? But it's a false cause. Right? We need perhaps more rehabilitation centers. We need more proactive private and public partnerships to help those who are suffering under alcoholism or what have you, right? But obviously, just taking away the beer ads would not make alcoholism disappear in no time. It is false cause. The argument is oversimplified cause. The beer ads are only one factor amongst many that cause alcoholism. Nobody's ever seen Kathy smoke a cigarette or a cigar. Therefore, Kathy is probably a non-smoker. Now, this does have the nobody has ever seen, right? So that would seem to be an appeal to ignorance. And yet, if nobody really has ever seen Kathy smoke a cigarette, you could probably infer that Kathy probably is a non-smoker. It is a no fallacy, right? If she were a smoker, people do not hide these things. You could smell it on them and so on, okay? There is no fallacy here. The last 3 tosses of this coin have come up tails. Therefore, it's extremely likely that the next toss will become up heads. We went over this already. Okay? This is a false cause, right? And this is the bettor's fallacy, the gambler's fallacy, right? Just because each toss of the coin has a 1 in 2 chance of landing tails or heads, and here, just because the previous ones, the odds are the same in the next one. Okay? So it's a false cause. All right? And this is the gambler's fallacy. Okay? They're not causally related from one toss of the coin to the next. Okay? So these are the fallacies of weak induction. I hope you've understood them. We've gone through all the problems that are in this section. Of course, you have your own homework problems to answer. But if you have any questions, do let me know. Either by, and we can hold virtual or in-person office hours, or you can even just email me with a few questions. Thank you.